Okay, well, it's wonderful to be with you again. I guess this is 3 years in a row, isn't that, Leah?
This is 3 years
That
in a
that we've
row.
been doing this, and I'm glad that we're initiating our discussion by looking at the New Start principles. And as you look at this first slide on your handout, with the question, what health strategy is the most important. So as you look at the New Start principles, as you outline those different strategies towards optimal health, the question that I oftentimes get is, well, which one of these is more important? How do we prioritize these? And I always smile when somebody asks me that question, because the right answer to that question is the strategy that's most important is the ones that I'm not doing. Okay. So if there's one of these strategies here, good nutrition, regular exercise, optimal water intake, use of sunlight and vitamin D, avoiding smoking and alcohol, daily fresh air, proper rest and sleep, forgiveness and trust. If there's one of these or several of these that we're not doing, those become the most important for us, because not doing those limits our ability to benefit optimally from the things that we are doing. Okay, so this is really important. I just finished, by the way, a 12-week online health seminar series that's free, and you can actually sign up for the next session I'm starting in a week or two. That's going to be online. It's free. You can just go to dryoungberg.com, my website, and you can sign up for the newsletter, which then will give you the email so that you can sign up for that. That's where I address all these issues. So one of the topics that I address is which one of these topics appears to be the least important to us, or something that we even try to avoid at times, but can become a critical part of our health program. Another topic is which one of these is most effective in helping us be successful in all the others. Okay, so those are other topics that we don't have time to get into this morning, but I just wanted to whet your appetite. Comprehensive wellness takes a comprehensive approach, but what I want to address this morning to you. I know you're in the middle of a great fitness week and learning all about wellness, and so that's great. I'm glad that you're involved with Leah. She's motivating and encouraging you to be and do the best that you can to optimize your health. So here's the question: what is the best way to initiate and motivate an effective wellness program? And so and that's a real important question, because if the key is, can we finish strong? Just about anybody can start a wellness program, but how many people actually are successful in finishing and just continuing, maintaining a really effective wellness program? And so my question is what are the strategies that help us stay focused on a really good wellness program for us? And that essentially is what leads us to the topic of today, which is the best lab test to maximize healing potential. I had a patient not too long ago. It was actually a patient that had come all the way from Alaska. And usually when somebody's in another state, I say, well, let's just do a Skype consult or a phone consult. But he was going to be in the Southern California area, and so um, he specifically. Oh, let's see here.
I just asked him to unfreeze himself.
Okay,
That's
can you
why
hear
he
me
got
now?
it.
I
We
can hear you.
we can hear you, but we're not seeing you yet.
You just can't see me? Okay, I don't have my video turned.
We're just waiting for your video to come up. That's all.
Um, while my video's on, I can stop it and start it again. Okay. All right. Okay. So the audio's okay. I don't need to use a mic. I can just keep going the way I'm going. Okay. Okay. Good. So this gentleman came to see me, and he was distressed. He was visiting some family in Southern California, and so he came to see me. And he says I'm really distressed because about a month ago I noticed a mass in my throat area, and and so he immediately, the alarms went off, right? He thought, oh no, maybe I have thyroid cancer, or maybe it's, some type of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and so of course his doctor had said, well, we need to do a CT scan. We need to know what this is, and he was afraid to do the CT scan because he knew that then he'd get a diagnosis that would give him, in what his opinion was, bad options: chemotherapy, radiation, and so he was afraid of that diagnosis, because he felt that that would then take him into all the things that he didn't want to get involved with. Well, as I talked with him, I realized that my role was to encourage him to learn as much as he could about his health. And I actually shared with him the story of Norman Cousins, which I think I mentioned to you last year. Essentially, a man who was diagnosed with a terminal illness. And he kept asking his doctor, he says, well, but what are my chances? And the doctor kept saying, no, it's terminal. You're going to die. And so finally, the Norman Cousins convinced the doctor to look up. He wanted to know what his statistical chances were. And the doctor went to the medical library, and yes, sure enough, he discovered that only 1 out of 500 people with that diagnosis survived. And so he shook his head, and he went to tell Norman Cousins, his patient in the hospital, says, "Sir, no, this is really terminal. There's only 1 out of 500 that survived this condition." And Norman Cousins says, "I'm going to be that one. I'm going to be that one that survives." And again, the doctor kept trying to say, "No, no, no, no. You need to stay in the hospital. You need to, try to take some of these palliative medications to help lower your inflammation." And Norman Cousins says, "Why would I stay in a hospital when, following the best standard of care, you're telling me I'm going to die?" So anyway, to make a long story short, he figured out a way to heal himself by being involved in his therapy, by figuring out what he needed to do. The biggest problem with our health or wellness programs these days is that we don't really know what the state of our health is at the beginning. We don't really understand. We don't have the correct diagnosis, which is very motivating to us. When somebody gets diagnosed with diabetes, instead of thinking, no, 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 that can't be true, I'm not going to go to the doctor again, I'm not, because I don't want to go on insulin, I don't want these medicines or whatever. The problem is that they believe somehow that once they have diabetes, they're going to have it for the rest of their life. But see, that's not true. If they begin to understand that the vast majority of illness is within the power of the body's healing system to literally heal it, if we start understanding that concept, then we can now start embracing the diagnosis and using that diagnosis as fuel for optimizing the body's ability to reverse that condition, how to go about optimizing our healing potential in using the the appropriate labs. And this reminds me of actually a quote from Jesus. You know, he had these crowds following him everywhere. The reason that so many people were excited about what he was doing is because he was literally the first teacher in that generation that spoke with power, that spoke with authority, that spoke truth. And so people just acted to this new truth. And he turned around to them one day and says, suppose one of you wants to build a tower. Why don't you first sit down and estimate the cost to see if you have enough money to complete it? What was basically he talking about there? In other words, we need to plan to be successful. And I'm sure Jesus had read in his childhood this Jewish proverb from many hundreds of years before that said, yes. Oh, you're not seeing me at all? You know what? My camera is off. That's why. Somehow it turned off. You know? Okay. All right. So, oh, you couldn't hear me. Okay. Okay. Sure. Sure. Okay. We can you hear me now? Wave if you can hear me. We're good. Okay. Good. Good. All right. So backing up a little bit here, we're emphasizing this whole topic of what are the optimal lab tests, and I've had so many patients who were afraid to find out what their problem was, and I could give you many examples of that, but essentially they're afraid because they believe that once they get that diagnosis, that there's really nothing they can do about it. They somehow believe that wellness is primarily to prevent a problem, but once you get diagnosed with the problem, now the only option is medication, surgery, chemo, etc. And that is not true. Wellness is even more powerful when you use it to heal the body of an illness, to help the body reverse a condition that is leading to other complications as well. And so it reminds me of a statement that Jesus made. You know, many crowds of people were following Jesus because he was for the first time they had found somebody, a teacher who spoke with authority, who spoke with power and spoke truth and helped convince them of what was right. And one day Jesus turned around to this large crowd and said, suppose one of you wants to build a tower. Won't you first sit down and estimate the cost to see if you have enough money to complete it? Essentially, Jesus was saying, you know, wouldn't it make sense if you're going to do something? You know, for instance, like what we're doing now, if you're going to get into a wellness program, don't you want to plan to make sure that you develop the program appropriately for you? And as a child, he had read these Jewish proverbs, for instance, plans fail for the lack of counsel, but with many advisors, they succeed. And so there's two key points I want to make about this proverb. Number one is that you involved in a wellness program, you want to have a health board of directors. You are the chairman or the chairwoman of your health. Let nobody else dictate to you what should be in your wellness plan. You are listening to me, and so in a sense, I'm on your team, your board of advisors. Leah is on your board of advisors, is providing counsel, providing encouragement. But ultimately, you have to make up your mind of what you're going to end up doing. But so you want to have many advisors, but there's another aspect to many advisors, and that is having objective input about many things that are going on inside your body. And that's the real value of lab testing, is it tells you something that you would otherwise not know. For instance, when I was growing up, when I was going through college, I was really into wellness. My mother had died of cancer when I was 10. And so I was very motivated to do everything that I could do to optimize my health. And I remember through college, I was a physical education and health major. And every year we'd get tested on many education majors all around the country. And in the top 5% of the nation categories. And I worked really hard to accomplish that year after year while I was in college. So I'll admit it, I started getting a little cocky, a little heady about my health. Can you still hear me okay? Can you still hear me okay? All right. So I started getting a little bit, cocky about how healthy I was. And I just, I've been a vegetarian all my life. I exercise. I ran marathons. I was athletic. I did gymnastics. But that didn't necessarily mean I was healthy. Now, I thought that I was healthy until when I was 24 years old. It's 1984, and it was the year that Drs. Brown and Goldstein won the Nobel Prize for medicine by discovering how cholesterol actually infiltrates the artery wall when it's oxidized and causes plaque formation. Well, so I gave a talk on this, and I was intrigued by it, and so I decided, hey, let's all get together, all my classmates, and get our cholesterol checked. Well, a couple days later, my friend who did the lab testing brought the information to me, and she had this worried look on her face. And so I thought she was just pulling my leg, because I was Mr. Health, right? But I looked at the cholesterol test, and I knew that for my age, my cholesterol should be under 150. I knew that, even though I'd never measured it. But when I had my cholesterol checked, it was 244. It was so high for a 24-year-old that it wasn't even on the chart. I was way off the chart. So my fitness bubble, my Mr. Health bubble just got popped. Boom. Now what? Well, I realized at that point that I needed to embrace the diagnosis. I needed to accept the fact that there was a chink in my health armor, that there was a problem with my health that I hadn't realized before. And that was the beginning of me recognizing that I wanted to know where all the chinks were in my armor. Not just my cholesterol problem, but okay, if I can have a cholesterol problem, what about other things? And so I'm going to be sharing with you lab tests this morning that will help you better understand what is important for you. And I look at these lab tests as your mini advisors. The more broad you do lab testing, the more broadly you can actually help heal these potholes on your journey, on your road to optimal wellness. You fill them in, and every time you fill in one pothole because of a new understanding through labs, you can get healthier and healthier and healthier. So it was Seneca, a Roman orator, who once said it's harder to cure to wish to be cured. And so if you really are wishing to be cured, you're going to be open to embracing new diagnosis, embracing finding out things about yourself that might be a little bit disconcerting initially, but they will give you an opportunity to dramatically improve your health compared to where you're at. So the first step in properly understanding and then treating the main causes of disease is assessment. That's really critical. It's assessment. So you see there in your handout that Jewish proverb that says, do your planning and prepare your fields before building your house. So that's why as you're developing a wellness program, I'm recommending that you get a baseline broad testing that includes genetic testing. Now, you might be thinking right now, wait a minute, Dr. Youngberg, you know, genes are unmodifiable risk factors. You know, what good does it do for me to check the Alzheimer's gene? And if I find out I have the Alzheimer's gene, I'm just going to be stressed out that eventually I'm going to get Alzheimer's because it's a gene, right? You can't change your genes, can you? Well, as some of you already know, genes do not actually determine your health. The Alzheimer's gene in of itself does not determine the eventual development of Alzheimer's. It only means that compared to everybody else, all other things being equal, you're at 4 to 35 times more likely to develop Alzheimer's. That's a huge increased risk, but it's that risk is dependent on you being like everybody else, right? Eating the same diet, not exercising. You know, the average American has a horrible diet, has a horrible exercise program, has a horrible attitude, has all the things working against them. And so if we learn to address the underlying causes of all these problems, we can reverse well over 90% of that risk. Okay, and so the first thing is genetic testing, and that great quote from Plato: "Know thyself." In other words, understanding the mutations that we carry dramatically can improve our health. I recently found out through one of these tests that I had a blood clotting mutation. This blood clot mutation dramatically increases my risk of having a pulmonary embolism or a deep vein thrombosis, basically throwing a clot that can cause a heart attack or a stroke or cause my premature death. So am I upset that I found out about this? No, I'm excited that I found out about that gene because I can prevent that from happening now by paying attention to all the lifestyle factors that influence blood clotting. So now I'm much better off knowing that I have that gene mutation. And by the way, every single one of us has hundreds and potentially thousands of gene mutations. Okay, so the goal is to find out at least the most important gene mutations that you and I carry, and so that way we can literally do a nutritional bypass. Now, let me explain what I mean by that. You know, humans have over 20,000 genes, and many of these genes are mutated. In other words, they no longer work the way they're supposed to work. Genes usually code for an enzyme or the building of a certain protein in the body, and the proteins have a specific task to help with healing or a certain function of the body. But if that gene is mutated, the protein that it makes is now not a healthy protein. It's dysfunctional in some way. And so I want to draw your attention to the quote from Cicero, where he says, "Old age must be resisted and its deficiencies supplied." You know, Cicero, brilliant Roman orator around the time of Christ, and he understood just intuitively. He didn't have all the knowledge we have today about how you can literally bypass gene mutations and the biochemical pathways and how we can fix all kinds of genetic problems. But he understood that the principle that as we get older, we need to figure out what our deficiencies are. And one of the greatest determinants of our deficiencies is gene mutations. Okay, and I'll give you some examples of gene mutations in a second. So bad genes, therefore, must be detected, be resisted, and its deficiency supplied. So when you have a bad gene, that means that you're making a bad enzyme. And those enzymes need nutrients, vitamins, and minerals to do their job. And so if the enzyme is based on a mutation, that means that now you need a lot more of those nutrients to do the job of that enzyme. Now, let me give you an example. Okay, dysfunctional genes must first be detected through lab testing, then supported holistically. In other words, broadly, not just in one way, but we need to look at the entire lifestyle New Start complex of strategies and support our mutated genes that way. And finally, we want to support them nutrigenomically, which means by giving the right nutrients, the genes change their expression. They change the way they work, okay? And we do that, of course, by supplying those deficiencies. Now, you'll see there that there's a slide that shows MTHFR plus plus, COMT plus minus, and at the bottom, 23andMe. What I regularly recommend to the vast majority of my patients is that they go on the website to 23andme.com and order a gene saliva test. Now, this gene saliva test is only $99. And you just order it yourself. You pay for it online. You get a saliva testing kit. You provide a saliva sample. You send it in. And 3 to 5 weeks later, you get a report, an email with a data file that then you can use to get a report on your genes, what mutations you have. And so I have these 4 genes that I have listed here, starting with the MTHFR, are some of the key genes that I use to help patients determine what their deficiencies are. You know, what are the things that I need to get healthier? And, you know, if you read health journals or go online and study about health, there's hundreds and thousands of things that might be beneficial for us. But what are the real keys based on our internal workings, our genetics, and our blood biomarkers? And so MTHFR just stands for methyl tetrahydrofolate reductase. This is a gene that will take a early version of folate and activate it, turn it on by putting a methyl group on that molecule. So if you have a gene mutation in the MTHFR, you can have up to a 90% inability to repair DNA, to detoxify in your body, to get rid of bad hormones, to prevent the replication of viruses. And so this methylfolate gene, MTHFR, is a critical gene to understand. And once we know if we have a mutation in that, then we know what to do next. Okay, the bottom one is a last example, the VDR gene mutation is the vitamin D receptor gene. Now, I've mentioned before at your fitness camp that vitamin D is critical for all of us. All whites, Mexicans, African Americans, we're all deficient in vitamin D. We all need to spend more time in the healthy levels of sunshine, and essentially the vast majority of us need to supplement vitamin D. There's just no way around that. And that's a whole separate topic. But one of the ways that we know that we even need to be more aggressive about supplementing vitamin D at a high level, in other words, to keep the blood levels all the way in the highest range of normal, somewhere between 70 and 100, is that if you have this vitamin D receptor mutation, which would be shown with a plus, that means that your body has a hard time using vitamin D to activate the genes to produce antiviral proteins, anti-cancer proteins. And so that means you just need to have more vitamin D. Okay, so the first way to evaluate our health, to get a good assessment, is to do an in-depth genetic analysis, and you can get that for as little as $99. So at 23andme.com. Okay, so now let's now go to the slide that looks at the relationships of insulin resistance and metabolic variables to coronary artery disease. There was a Dr. David Eddy, a brilliant physician who also had a PhD in mathematics, and he was at Duke University and then went to Stanford University. And what he did, he took this huge data file from the government census health studies, the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey that's done every 10 years, where tens of thousands of individuals get in-depth medical testing, laboratory testing. And what he did is he put all that information into a supercomputer with all their risk factors, and then he did a simulated computerized study by controlling just one risk factor, one of the many risk factors that this group had, for 60 years. So the 60-year simulated study was from age 20 until age 80, and they controlled for one risk factor at a time. Now, the key to understand on this slide is that some of us feel like there's no hope for us because we have such a significant family history of diabetes, cancer, heart disease, and all kinds of other problems. But this 80 or 60-year study actually showed that our family history, if we get rid of all the negative family history across the board for 60 years, the impact of family history, that only controls for 4% of our risk for heart attacks. 4%. Okay, I'm not saying family history isn't important. I think it is important. I think we should always use it to figure out what the most important strategies are for you and I. However, it's not as important as the things that we control. It's not nearly as important. Even smoking was only lowered the risk of a heart attack by 9% by no smoking from age 20 until age 80. Okay, and of course, not smoking is a critical part of health, but not nearly as important as the other ones. Controlling the LDL, the bad cholesterol, had a 16% influence. Okay, that's a little bit more, but improving the good cholesterol, the HDL cholesterol, which we should all know about and understand where we're at, that way had a 31% influence on the risk of a heart attack. But the bigger issues were the blood pressure, the top number, systolic high blood pressure was 36% of the risk of having a heart attack during that 60-year study. But the biggest issue was insulin, was how much insulin your body had to produce in order to control your blood sugars. And so that's why I am a very, very big proponent of doing a blood testing. Okay, and if you look at the next slide, you'll see that we want to figure out how to optimize our insulin levels. And the first test that helps give us some clues is your fasting blood sugar. The fasting blood glucose, if you're at 100, that means you have pre-diabetes. Okay, but the very best way to discover if you have pre-diabetes and an insulin problem is to do a 2-hour glucose tolerance test. You know that a full 30%, actually 30 to 40% of people who have diabetes right now, when they get their physical and their fasting blood sugar, the doctors say, you're fine, you don't have any problem. So a full third of people who have diabetes are told they don't have diabetes because they've only tested the fasting blood sugar, which is not nearly as sensitive as a blood sugar after a meal. So if you have your blood sugars checked 2 hours after a carbohydrate-rich meal or a glucose or a sugar drink of some kind, and your blood sugar is 140 or higher, that's pre-diabetes. If your blood sugar is 200 or higher at that point, that's full-blown diabetes. So these are some of the first blood tests that I would strongly recommend that everybody gets. Another test is the hemoglobin A1C. Now, I have everybody tested for this test. This is essentially the test that shows how much sugar is sticking to your cells in your blood because of blood sugar spikes after you eat. And so this is a test that can help doctors diagnose prediabetes and diabetes. And so prediabetes begins with a hemoglobin A1C of 5.7%. If you're at 6.5% or higher, that is diabetes. Okay, now there are actually 5 stages of high blood sugars, and you see that slide in your handout. And it's important to note that prediabetes is already stage 3 high blood sugar. So we don't even want to wait until we have prediabetes to do something about it, even though if you're over 40 years of age, there's at least a 50% chance that you already have prediabetes. So if you're between ages 40 and 59, 1 out of every 2 individuals that age already have at least prediabetes. If you're between the ages of 60 and 74, 2 out of 3 of you in that age range already have at least pre-diabetes. And if you have a blood sugar, if your age is 75 or older, then statistically, the chances are that 3 out of 4 of you already have at least prediabetes. So it's kind of discouraging to know that it's such a prevalent condition, but the problem is that 90% of us have no idea that we have prediabetes because we haven't done the 2-hour glucose tolerance test to actually catch the condition early. But as you can see, there are already 2 stages of high blood sugar before prediabetes. And so that's why this chart can help you, even if you do your own testing before 1 or 2 hours after a meal. You can do your own testing and figure out where you are, okay? What your actual risk is of that diabetes. Now, the most important, though, the most sensitive test is that when you do this 2-hour glucose tolerance, I always have patients check their fasting insulin and their 2-hour insulin level. And so you see on the slide that says, how's your pancreas doing, right? If your body is producing lots of insulin in order to try to correct your blood sugar level, that means that your pancreas is overworking. Not only that, but your pancreas is producing so much insulin that extra insulin is potentially one of the main causes of high blood pressure. It's one of the main causes of weight gain, difficulty losing weight. It's actually a main cause of skin cancer, prostate cancer for men, breast cancer, and colon cancer, and ovarian cancer. Now, I bet you that most of you in the audience today have never heard that insulin has a relationship to cancer. That insulin, high insulin, not normal insulin levels, but if your body's having to produce lots of insulin, extra insulin, in order to control blood sugars, that extra insulin is basically helping initiate cancer and dramatically promoting cancer. It's like pouring gasoline on a fire. It's going to explode or burn heavier. That's the relationship between high insulin and cancer. Real critical. So I believe if we test for this and then control for optimizing insulin levels, we're not only lowering the risk of heart disease, right? Because we just showed, Dr. David Eddy's study from Stanford showed that insulin levels were the #1 risk factor for heart attacks. So not only do we control our risk for heart disease, but dramatically lower the risk for diabetes, dramatically lower the risk for cancer, and even dramatically lower the risk of autoimmune diseases and hormonal imbalances. You know, the #1 hormone that gets out of balance is insulin. And so until we control insulin, all the other hormones are going to be are going to be a little bit out of whack as well. So that's why I strongly recommend testing fasting insulin, and a 2-hour insulin is part of a 2-hour glucose tolerance test. Okay, now, uh, in truth, I almost always order a 4-hour test. It's a hassle of a test. You got to be at the lab a whole morning. But here's the value of that. More and more people that I'm seeing, in fact, about a third of the patients that I see actually have adrenal fatigue. They're tired, they're fatigued, they especially late afternoon, they're just kind of dragging, and then energy starts to pick up maybe in the later evening hours, 8 o'clock, or after 7 o'clock, they start feeling a little bit better, and then they don't want to go to sleep because they feel great. So they stay up late, and then that creates more insulin resistance, and high insulin level puts pressure on the adrenal glands. They have to produce more cortisol. And so the cycle just continues and continues. And so that's why I recommend a 4-hour test to see, does the blood sugar start to drop too low? Do the cortisol levels drop too low? Are your adrenal glands under stress, and are they not working? Now, another test that you can actually do at home is what I call the Pepsi Jelly Bean Challenge. And essentially, all you need for that is a home blood sugar test kit. Anybody can buy at any pharmacy without a prescription. You can go to Walmart and buy a $19. Then what you do is you check your blood sugar. You just poke the side of your finger, get a little bit of blood. You check your blood sugar at the beginning and before breakfast, and then compare it to the 5 stages of. And then what you do is you just pick 300 to 400 calories of carbohydrate-rich food. It can be crackers, it can be rice, it can be cookies, it can be sodas, it can be fruit. Whatever you normally eat that's high carbohydrate, that's what you eat, because you want to learn the impact of what you're eating on your blood sugar levels, right? And so you do that, and you see how high your blood sugars or how low your blood sugars go during that 4-hour period, and compare it to the chart. So that's a great test. So we've now if somebody's already on insulin. Let's say you're taking insulin because you have diabetes that is type 1 diabetes, or you have a type 2 diabetes that eventually got so bad that your doctor said you needed insulin. Well, the question is that I get from patients who are on insulin medication is, well, what's the chances of me getting off this medication if I have a comprehensive wellness program? Well, what we do in that case is we can't measure insulin, because if we measure their blood insulin level, that's actually going to also include the insulin that was injected by that patient, right? So what we do is we measure a C-peptide test, and this C-peptide test is the pancreas produces just as much C-peptide as insulin. Okay, and so the C-peptide can give us a really good estimate of how functional the pancreas is. And so if your pancreas is still producing lots of insulin, that means that by getting on a regular exercise program, optimal nutritional program, walking immediately after meals, which lowers your blood sugars a full point to 3 points for every minute that you walk. If you do all those things, you could, within a matter of 1, 2, or 3 months, improve your blood sugar so much that that's all understood properly. So I've had many patients. In fact, I had one patient recently who bought my book, Goodbye Diabetes, because he wanted to help his daughter, who was in her late 50s, who had diabetes, to improve her diabetes. So he started reading the book at age 89, and he said, hey, maybe I need to do these tests. I've never done any of these tests. And so he did, and I did this whole 4-hour test and find out he had out of control diabetes. His blood sugars were running 300, 350 after meals during the 4-hour test. And so he, it shook him up. He's like, whoa, I had no idea I just out of control diabetes. But we also did the C-peptide test, and it was high. And I said to him, I said, sir, you have the potential to completely reverse this if you're willing to do what is necessary. And he was the chairman of the board of a big corporation, multimillionaire. And he said, just tell me what I need to do, and I'm going to do it. You know, he's one of these business guys who don't mess around, right? Just going to do it. You know, in 7 weeks, he reversed his diabetes a week before he turned 90 years old. And so on his 90th birthday, he was celebrating not only that he had reached 90, but that he was now healthier at age 90 than he had been at age 70. He had reversed his diabetes that had been subtly but dramatically influencing his health for many decades. So that's the value of the C-peptide test. Other labs that I strongly recommend is the cardiac CRP. This is a measure of inflammation. And patients frequently ask me, inflammation where? And the answer is everywhere. Because if it's in your blood, it's everywhere. Okay? It's everywhere your blood flows. And so what we want to know is, do you have a tendency to have excess inflammation? And a cardiac CRP should be at least less than 1.0. And if you have inflammation, then we want to look at all the New Start strategies, because each one that you follow lowers inflammation further. You know, just exercising every day, like Leah is encouraging you, and I understand you just did not too long ago this morning. That exercise session lowered your inflammation by about 30% just because you did that. Okay? Extremely powerful. So measure your cardiac CRP, and then we do everything possible to get it down and retest it every couple months until it comes down into the optimal range. Next blood test is iron and the storage form of iron called ferritin. This is not a standard test. And sometimes Medicare won't even cover this test, but it's not that expensive. I would just do it anyways. And here's why: because potentially up to 10% of individuals have a very high storage form of iron. And that all by itself can cause complications in diabetes, can cause heart attacks, and can promote cancer. And so you want to know if you have excess stores of iron. And if you do, that's one of the good arguments to, well, what foods are the richest in iron? Well, it's just basically any meats, any flesh food, anything that has had blood pumping through it at one time or another is going to be high in the form of iron that can actually be damaging to our body. And so that's one strategy. Number two, some people who have super high levels simply need to donate blood every couple of months, and that'll keep that level under control, dramatically decreasing the risk of a retinal detachment of the eyes, kidney damage, heart attacks, nerve damage. All kinds of problems are limited by optimizing iron levels. Then we have vitamin D level, the 25-hydroxy vitamin D blood test. I can't say enough about this. I could literally talk for 3 or 4 hours about all the studies on this. Essentially, I already said all of us are vitamin D deficient unless we're supplementing. Okay, I've tested every patient's vitamin D level for the last 15 years, and it's actually going on 20 years now. And I've only seen maybe a dozen patients in that entire 2 decades that did not need to supplement to have optimal levels of vitamin D. That's how bad this problem is. Okay, and so that's why everybody should first test their level of vitamin D, make sure that their vitamin D level is above 50 and preferably in the 70-80 range. And if you have serious disease, in between 80 and 100. So test your vitamin D, optimize. The average woman needs 5,000 units of vitamin D. The average man needs 6,000 units of vitamin D. And it's actually is protective to the body in the sense that it protects against ultraviolet radiation. The downside of that is that that means you need to be in the sunlight. Okay, those of us with the darker our skin is, the more we need to be in the sunlight. That includes those of us who have tans. So the more we're in the sun, the more sun we need, because a dark tan will prevent vitamin D from being produced by sunlight. So that's why all of us need to consider supplementing vitamin D appropriately, and also spending time, a prudent amount of time in the sun on a daily basis. Okay, so what are some other tests that are strongly very beneficial to us? And that would include a comprehensive thyroid profile. Now, I've been working with a lot of patients for many years, and one of the frequent problems I see is they say, my doctor checked my thyroid stimulating hormone, the TSH, and told me that my thyroid was fine, but when I look at all the symptoms associated with low thyroid function, I have most of those symptoms. My skin is dry, I have difficulty swallowing sometimes, I'm cold all the time, my body temperature is low, I'm tired, I'm low energy, I might even have palpitations, which strangely enough is a sign of low thyroid as well. But my doctor isn't paying attention to this. So that's when we want to look at all 6 blood tests. So looking at not only the thyroid stimulating hormone, but the actual thyroid hormones, the free T4, the free T3, and then the 2 thyroid antibodies, the thyroid peroxidase antibody, the thyroglobulin antibody, and then finally the reverse T3, which is it's a thyroid hormone that's inactivated. So if your body's converting the active thyroid hormone into the inactive thyroid hormone, the reverse T3, then you're going to have a problem even if all the other labs are normal. So thyroid needs to be carefully evaluated and monitored. Now, I will say this, though. A lot of people who have thyroid-like symptoms, actually their main problem is adrenal dysfunction, adrenal insufficiency. And so that's why the first test that I emphasize is that 4-hour glucose tolerance test that also measures cortisol levels, the adrenal hormone cortisol, because we need to fix the adrenals first. If there's a real problem with adrenal fatigue, we need to fix that first before we put too much emphasis on thyroid, unless, of course, thyroid is obviously off. And then we treat both of them at the same time. So that's a lab test that can be wonderful in helping you understand how to personalize your wellness program. And then, of course, we have the complete metabolic profile, the CMP, and the CBC, which is the complete blood count that looks at the white blood cells, the red blood cells, the hemoglobin, hematocrit, and so forth. And so those are tests that can help give us clues of, are you getting enough vitamin B12? Are you getting enough folate in your diet? And how your kidneys are doing, how your liver is doing, and so forth. So those are standard tests. Those last 2 are standard tests that are available with any physical, but what I've shown you already are other tests that are really provide a significant new awareness of what's going on in our health. Okay, so I've already talked about the hemoglobin A1C and how they relate to prediabetes or diabetes. I will say this, though, that a lot of people think that if they just do this hemoglobin A1C test that measures, how much sugar is sticking to your cells, that's the best test to diagnose prediabetes and diabetes, and that's not true. It's a good test. I have everybody do it, but by the way, the optimal level should be at 5.0 or less, not for a diabetic, but for a regular individual, right? If you have diabetes, you should not through medication, try to get an optimal level of hemoglobin A1C. That would be potentially devastating to your health. You don't want to take so much medicine that forces your blood sugar that low. That the studies show that it actually increases your risk of death. It doesn't improve your health at all. So you shouldn't try to lower your A1C blood test below 7 with medication. You can do it with diet and exercise, but not with medication, because that extra medication could cause real serious complications to you. But the best test to diagnose and to catch diabetes and prediabetes early is what? Right? It's the glucose tolerance test, either 2 or the 4-hour test. So that's available. But it's important to know that the level of your hemoglobin A1C determines, you see on the second column, a blood glucose test average, that for every point your A1C percent goes up, you have a 30 to 40 point increase in blood sugar. So it's a good average of your blood sugar. And every point that you go up in the A1C is associated with a 35% increased risk of diabetic-related complications, like nerve damage, vision loss, kidney disease, 22% increased risk of peripheral vascular disease. Every point your A1C goes up above 5, you have an 18% increased risk of a heart attack and a 25% increased risk of dying associated with diabetes. Okay, so that's why that test is so important. Now, I also want to spend a little time helping you understand, though, whenever you have a physical exam, and hopefully you have that every year with your family doctor or internist or gynecologist or family practitioner or nurse practitioner. You know, sometimes the nurse practitioners are actually the most open to wellness strategies. It's interesting how that works. But so you have this comprehensive lipid profile, right? The cholesterol profile. Okay, and so here's an example. Here's an example of a 51-year-old male who's getting a routine physical. And the question is, well, how should they be treated? You know, are there any concerns here with the cholesterol that's 158, you know, a LDL cholesterol that's at 101, it's just slightly above 100. The good cholesterol HDL is at 43. Triglycerides are well under 150 at 70. And so that patient would be sent home saying, wow, you know, Mr. Jones, your cholesterol is great. There is no need to test you, to do any more testing or to you don't need to change your diet. You're good. Okay. But you look at the next slide, the hidden risk revealed. We understand that only 40% of your actual risk of a heart attack this given year is determined by that lipid profile. So it's important. It picks up 40% of the risk. But what about the other 60%? Okay, just because you don't have a high cholesterol, there's still a 60% chance that you could have a heart attack that year. Okay, that's not good averages, right? And so that's why I think it's critical for us to pay attention to the advanced hidden risk factors. And so you see here is that there are additional tests, okay, that like for instance the LPPLA2 test. This is actually called the plaque test. So even though this patient's cholesterol is super good, his plaque test is above 200. You see that it's in red, it's in the high risk range. So that means that that person, even though their cholesterol is low, actually have plaque cells in their artery wall that are releasing enzymes. This LPPLA2 enzyme that only comes from arteries that have plaque in them. And so I want to know if I have plaque in my arteries. I don't want to do a heart coronary catheterization to figure that out. But here's a simple blood test that can tell us whether you have plaque in your arteries. And so I check everybody now on this plaque test. And I have found multiple people now just in this summer alone that have a cholesterol of about 150, but they have very high plaque, right? And so now that helps me provide advice for them and really get aggressive about the diet, getting rid of cholesterol, getting rid of animal products in the diet, going more plant-based with the diet, and then using the right nutritionals to help support cardiovascular health as well. So that's the first one. But then, so the plaque test looks at inflammation in the blood vessels, in the artery wall itself. But the next test here is the cardiac CRP, the high sensitivity CRP measure of inflammation. That should be less than 1, and here it's 12.7. Okay, so just because your cholesterol is all perfect doesn't mean that you're perfectly healthy. Just like me, I thought I was Mr. Health, but my cholesterol was sky high. Back then, we didn't have these advanced risk factor tests. His hemoglobin, or homocysteine is high, which means he needs more vitamin B12 and more methylated folate. His lipoprotein A, the sticky type of LDL bad cholesterol, is also high. So that means that we need to pay attention to this. He's got lots of the small dense LDL and not enough of the healthy HDL cholesterol, and his vitamin D is low. And so you see, is looking at these advanced risk factors really picks up the majority of the risk. So that's what I encourage my patients to do. So if your plaque test is above 200 and your CRP is above 2, you now have an 11-fold increased risk of having a stroke. That's 1,100% greater risk of having a stroke. And these are two tests that are frequently not measured when you have your physical. So I believe, and what I do with every single patient is I do these tests at minimum along with the cholesterol profile. That is really, really critical. Okay, and so as we're looking at the inflammation protein, cardiac CRP, we want to be in the lowest 20% of risk, not average. The blood test results I always say 1 to 3 is average, but since when was average healthy, right? Average is, well, the average person has a heart attack. The average person develops cancer sometime in their life. You don't want to be average, right? We want to be optimal. And so that's why you want to be in the first quintile, that is the lowest 20% of risk. And that means our CRP should be less than 0.6, okay? So the next slide is the one that shows the artery with the rupturing of the plaque. And that's essentially why we do the plaque test. The LPPLA2 test actually picks up that tendency of plaque to rupture, and it informs us that we got to be really much more aggressive and add some strategies to our current wellness program. Okay, so some of the other slides, the vitamin D, the HDL2B, we've already talked about, but let me make one more point about vitamin D. And by the way, these are slides that I've gotten permission to use. These are slides put together by what's called the Hunter Heart Advanced Cardiovascular Risk Factor Profile, and Dr. Paul Dijak, who's one of the eminent specialists in this field. He practices in Florida. He says that the vast majority of the patients that he gets referred to him by cardiologists because they get muscle pain and joint pain and fatigue when they take cholesterol-lowering medications. He says the vast majority of them are cured of that pain when they start taking vitamin D. Okay, so this is one more reason we should take vitamin D. Okay, I'm not a big fan of cholesterol-lowering medications. Okay, I know that many people are taking them, but I believe that if you get on the right diet and the right wellness program, the vast majority of people on a cholesterol-lowering medication can actually go off of it or limit it greatly And of course, that in itself decreases the risk of diabetes and heart disease. Ironically, medications that lower cholesterol, like statins, will actually increase the risk of diabetes by 59% in women and to a lesser extent in men. So it's kind of a strange scenario that we use a medicine to lower cholesterol, to lower the risk of heart disease, but which in turn increase insulin resistance, which is the main risk factor for heart disease. Okay, so that's one reason I'm certainly not convinced that it's beneficial, and I believe that the evidence, the medical evidence, suggests that it's actually potentially harmful to use those medications, especially if it's being done without a comprehensive diet and wellness program. Okay, so make sure you take your vitamin D. Now, what about genes that relate to heart disease or advanced risk markers? And so I want to spend a couple minutes talking about the ApoE genotype. So the apolipoprotein E is a very interesting test. I believe that every single person should get this test. By the way, this test is also part of the saliva test on the 23andMe that I mentioned earlier. So if you get the 23andMe and get the reports that come with that, you actually will get this test. Now, why is this test so important? Well, first of all, if you have one copy of that gene mutation, in other words, whenever our genes, we always have two copies of that gene, right? We get one copy from our mom and one copy from our dad. The question is did you get a healthy copy from your mom or an unhealthy copy from your mom, and vice versa from your dad? So if you end up, you're supposed to have an ApoE3 gene, so it should be E3, E3. But what if you have one copy of the E4 gene, which is the Alzheimer's related gene? Well, one copy of that, it doubles your risk of a heart attack. Okay, on top of all the other known risk factors, you get a doubling risk. Okay, number two, it increases your risk of Alzheimer's from 2 to 4 times. That's just one copy. If you have two copies of that gene, you can increase the risk of a heart attack by 200% and the risk of Alzheimer's from 500% to 3,400%. I mean, this is huge. Okay, so again, I mentioned at the beginning of my talk, the average person, when faced with the reality of how powerful that gene is, they say, well, I don't want to test for the Alzheimer's gene because if I find out I have it, I'm going to be stressed out for the next 20 years. I don't want to worry about it until I get my Alzheimer's. Then I'm not going to have to worry about it anyways, because my family's going to have to worry about it. Well, who wants to put their family through that? If you believe that you could actually reverse the damage associated, the risk associated with that gene, now would you want to know about that gene? Of course we would. And so that's why I tested myself for this. I really thought I had this gene because my grandfather had Alzheimer's on my mother's side. But in fact, I have the normal gene. I got the Claudia mutation gene, but I don't have the Alzheimer's gene. But I still want to take care of, my brain, right? Because I've had several concussions in my life, and I know that in itself, even without the gene, increases the risk for Alzheimer's. So there's always something that we can do to lower our risk. And so make sure that you disease and Alzheimer's. Okay. Percent of all pulmonary embolism patients have this gene. So you're just much more likely to get a pulmonary embolism, a deep vein thrombosis if you have this genetic defect which means that if you sit a lot, if you fly, if you travel a lot, either on a bus or on an airplane or a train.
Those that fly, those that, I guess, catch trains a lot, if you could wrap that up in a minute, and then we'll pick it up next week.
Okay, yeah, so that last lab test that I was talking about is called the factor V line imputation test. And what happens is that if you have this mutation to clotting, or the blood clots very easily, it's very important that we don't sit very long. Studies show that even if you exercise a half hour, 45 minutes every day, if you spend the rest of the day mostly sitting, that in itself increases inflammation and a risk of heart disease. And so the recommendation now is that we get up out of our chair at least every 60 minutes, every hour. And even if it's only 2 to 3 minutes of walking around, that limits our risk. That helps increase circulation in our bloodstream. So the main point is to stay active throughout the day, even little things. Don't just rely on your daily exercise plan.
Questions? Please come down.
We have to repeat the question? Say it twice? Okay. Hello, doctor. How are you? Great. I have a question. The first one is, you said that you recommend being in sunlight as much as possible to increase the vitamin D in our bodies. Does that also include cloudy days, just daylight time, or is it actual sun? I'll repeat the question again.
Any way that you can,
We have another mic. We're trying to get the other mic here.
type the question out for me so I see it better. I know it was related to vitamin D, but I didn't get the rest.
Okay, we're going to have her repeat it.
Hi. I just wondered, getting in the sunlight also include overcast days, or is it really sunny days that we need to be in the sun more often to increase our vitamin D stores?
Okay, actually diet is a very poor way to optimize vitamin D. I know that vitamin D is fortified in certain products. They can add vitamin D to milk products, but that's still not. You have to drink gallons and gallons of milk a day to get an optimal amount of vitamin D. So there's very few ways dietarily to get vitamin D. That's why really it's either sun exposure or supplementing vitamin D. So I don't recommend trying to get vitamin D from the diet because it's almost impossible to get an optimal level of vitamin D from food.
Question testing. My last question is, of the tests that you told us to get, genetic tests, how do we get our physicians, what approach do you suggest we take with our physicians to get them to do those tests? The genetic tests?
That's a great question. At least what you have with the handout is you have a list of all the tests that I use for my patients. And so, what you can request of your patients, say, hey, I went to this great house lecture, and these were the tests that some doctors are now using to evaluate their patients' risk factors at a more advanced level. And, would you be willing to test these labs for me? Now, one of the challenges is that many doctors are not comfortable ordering tests that they don't understand. And so that's why what some people do is they'll actually get a copy of my book, My Diabetes, which has a whole chapter of these lab tests. And they'll give it to the doctor and say, here, read about these tests. That way you'll know and understand the value of the test, how to interpret the test, so that they're more likely to order it. So
the simvastatin for the cholesterol, and I didn't hit all of it. So you said there's good things for the simvastatin, but there's also some side effects. Could you elaborate on that, please?
Okay, so are you talking about the statin medication or the homocysteine blood test?
The medication.
Okay, so of course, the new guidelines that officially came out by the American Heart Association and other organizations suggest that the majority of Americans adults should be on a statin, which is kind of ridiculous that everybody needs to be on a statin. The problem with statins is that, number one, they have all from the beginning, even the early 80s, we knew that the animal studies showed that statins increase the risk of cancer. And the problem, and one of the reasons for that is because it increases insulin resistance dramatically. And I've already explained in the lecture that anytime insulin levels go up in the bloodstream, that's going to automatically drive cancer growth in the body, especially the common cancers of colon, breast cancer, skin cancer, ovarian cancer, and so forth. So the problem with the studies is that the studies that were done to evaluate both the effectiveness and the safety of the medication ultimately only showed that they were effective. They're very effective at lowering cholesterol. There's no question about that. The question is, does that really translate into lowering the risk of heart disease? And that's very debatable, and especially for people who have no history of heart disease. If somebody's taking cholesterol just simply because they have a high cholesterol, there's very little evidence that actually helps you prevent a heart attack. Okay? But there is evidence from animal studies that taking that medicine long term increases risk for cancer, increases the risk of diabetes, increases the risk of dementia. So those are my concerns. And so fortunately, we don't have to choose between lowering cholesterol and or not taking a medication. We can choose a diet that helps optimize that as well. So those are my main concerns.
Okay, Dr. Youngberg, we're going to close out now, and then we'll reschedule next week. But can you hear me? Yes, I'd like to just share Beverly Cheatham's testimony when she came to you, and how we learned that she ended up having diabetes. But I think Beverly could probably tell it better than I.
All right. Dr. Youngberg was the doctor that ordered the test that showed that my A1C was 7.8. When my doctor saw it, he did not even want to say the word, "Do you have diabetes?" He said, "You know what this means." And so I said, yes. He said, "What do you want? Do you want diet or do you want medication?" I said, "Give me diet. I will do diet." He said, "Will you go to the classes?" I said, "Yes, I'll go to the classes." I went to the classes and I read his book. And when they tested me again 3 months later, it was 6.0. And I walk after I eat. And I'm very careful with what I eat, and God is blessing. So there is hope.
Congratulations, Beverly. It's been wonderful seeing your great improvement. Keep it up.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Youngberg. We're going to have to close down now, but we do have your book here that we will share with everyone that's here. And perhaps you and I will talk, and I'll get questions from the audience specifically that they would like to have answered. Thank you so much. We enjoyed you. Unfortunately, we had a few hiccups, but let's